Thank you, Chairman Durbin. And I want to thank the ranking member and the other members of this committee for the privilege of appearing before the committee today. I also want to thank President Biden for the confidence placed in me through this nomination. And I'm especially honored by the support of my two home state senators, Tina Smith and Eumi Klobuchar. I want to thank their staffs as well, and Senator Smith for her generous words this morning, and also to Senator Klobuchar for her comments, friendship, and support. I would like to introduce two people who are here with me today. My very close friend from law school and fellow El Pasoan, Ricardo Avila, and my wife, Liz. I'm full of love for her and gratitude that she is my life partner. I also want to acknowledge those watching remotely, my father and stepmother from Texas, and my mother who's watching from St. Paul. And I'd like to acknowledge my children, although I hope that they are now paying attention to their teachers and not watching remotely. But nevertheless, I want to say I love them both and am extremely proud of them. And finally, I'd like to express my gratitude for all of the judges and the attorneys who've impacted my career, like Judge Magnuson, for whom I clerked, and Judge Thunheim, whose seat I have been nominated to fill, and so many other state court judges who have taught me so much. Thank you, Senators, for this opportunity to speak with you this morning.
Judge Lee.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin and Ranking Member Graham, for scheduling this hearing today. And thank you to Senator Padilla. It is. All right, let me scoot in a little closer. Thank you. So I began briefly by thanking Chairman Durbin and Ranking Member Graham for scheduling this hearing, and thanking Senator Padilla and Senator Feinstein for the warm introduction, recommendation, and kind words. I'm grateful to President Biden for the tremendous honor of this nomination, and I am humbled by the faith he has placed in me. I would not be here today but for my parents, Seok-young and Dong-suk Lee, who are watching from home. My parents were children of the Korean War, and like so many immigrants before them, they came to America to pursue their dreams. They stayed for ours. My parents instilled in my brother and me the value of hard work, the importance of education, and a commitment to service. They could not have imagined that I'd be sitting here today. I'd like to introduce those who are with me today. My brother Eugene, who is representing our family, is a psychiatrist who previously served our country as a major in the Army Reserves, where he was stationed here at Walter Reed. My husband of 15 years, Michael, my steadfast partner and amazing father. I would not be able to do this without him. Near him, or here in the building, is my 8-year-old son, who's been my inspiration. I'm also joined by 4 women who are my chosen family. Lori Perlman, my close friend from the Bay Area, Rachel Jensen, my former co-clerk from the Ninth Circuit, Renee Lee, my best friend from college, and finally Beth Penland, one of my closest childhood friends from Tennessee. Briefly touching upon my family and friends who are watching and supporting me remotely, my sister-in-law Sharon, who has worked at the VA for over 30 years, my husband's parents, Charles and Marilyn, who have welcomed me as their own daughter, and my husband's brother and sisters. And to my aunties and uncles growing up in Tennessee who formed their own little Joy Luck Club there, thank you. They are joined online by my professional family, the attorneys and staff who I've worked with at Kecker and Van Nest, and my former colleagues and students from UC Hastings College of the Law, now UC College of the Law SF. And to my court family, my colleagues on the bench and the staff of the Alameda County Superior Court, it is an honor to serve with you. Special thanks to Amanda and Charles who are holding down the fort in my department. And as a former educator, I'd be remiss if I did not thank my teachers, my professors from Georgetown Law, Pomona College, and my teachers from Oak Ridge High School. Thank you for always encouraging me. I also want to thank the legal giants who gave me my start in the law and who are no longer with us. The late Judge Warren J. Ferguson of the Ninth Circuit and District Judge Jerome Turner of the Western District of Tennessee. Both taught me the values and principles that shaped me into the attorney I was and the jurist I strive to be every day. Senators, thank you for allowing me this opportunity and for your consideration of my nomination.
Thank you, Judge Lee. Ms. Robinson.
Good morning, Chairman Durbin, and I'd like to acknowledge Ranking Member Graham, although he stepped out, and distinguished members of the Judiciary Committee, thank you for convening this hearing and for your time, attention, and consideration of my nomination. I am honored and grateful to have been nominated by the President to serve as the Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinator. I would like to express my thanks to the President and the administration for having the confidence and trust in me and my ability to carry out such an important role. I would also like to give a special thanks to my parents, Charles and Bernice Robinson. They both passed away within the last year, but would have been absolutely thrilled to watch this hearing today. Both of my parents were educators and instilled in me the value of hard work and exposed me to opportunities that led to my professional success. I am here today because of their love, support, parenting, and fine examples of what it looks like to be good citizens and good people. In addition to my parents, I have a wonderful family. My family members supporting me in person today are my sister, Dr. Leslie Robinson, and my cousins, Nancy Guy, Dr. Carol Guy, and Dr. Ayanna McIntosh. Also present are dear friends who I consider family. They are Jimmy Johnson, Penny Carmichael, Andrea Coleman, Darla Washington, Valerie Williams, Jay West, Terry Cubia, Judge Karen Simmons, Jennifer Long, and my Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority sisters, who I will not name individually in the interest of time today. Watching remotely are additional family, including my godmother, Joanne Cannon, colleagues, sorority sisters, and friends, including Rosa Copeland Miller and Carla Jackson. Thank you all for your encouragement, support, and prayer throughout my career, and especially today. I've practiced IP in both the private sector as a corporate attorney and in public service as a prosecutor. While I could not have imagined that my professional choices would have led me to a nomination, I have always envisioned that I would use my skills to have meaningful impact on the community. If I am fortunate enough to become the IPAC, I will proceed with that goal every day. Simply put, if I am confirmed, I will be dedicated to working to effectively enforce the intellectual property rights of the American people. Beyond coordinating with the relevant agencies to develop the United States' overall IP enforcement strategy, my goal will be to make sure that Americans know that their government prioritizes the protection of their gifts, brilliance, and creations, and will secure the rights of inventors, scientists, artists, authors, farmers, and everyone across the whole of the IP landscape. Having worked on content protection issues for more than 15 years, it is clear to me that effective IP enforcement requires government to take both a proactive and reactive approach to protecting intellectual property rights. To achieve this, I will work closely with the Justice, FDA, Homeland Security, Agriculture, Commerce, Defense, and State Departments, the Copyright Office, USPTO, and many other agencies and stakeholders to build on the work of previous IPACs. There are 4 areas of focus that will guide my approach in the IPAC role. Broadly speaking, they are first and foremost safety and security of the American people. This means, among other things, supporting the enforcement agencies to ensure that infringing products such as counterfeit medicines, knockoff batteries, and poisonous health and beauty products stay out of American homes and businesses. I will also build on the work of previous IPACs to facilitate stakeholder-driven voluntary initiatives and programs, especially to prevent digital infringement. Second, ensure that the IPAC office and the relevant enforcement agencies stay abreast and understand technological developments that affect IP rights and pose threats. Third, support existing international partner programs and work closely with our international-facing agencies and partners to disrupt and prevent foreign-based and state-sponsored infringement. And fourth, use education and access to information to create an open line of exchange of content protection-related information between IP owners, and stakeholders in the office of the IPAC. I'm happy to discuss these 4 areas of focus in greater detail. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Ranking Member, and each of the senators of this committee for this incredible opportunity. I look forward to answering your questions today.
Thanks, Ms. Robinson. So I read here, the job you are seeking advises the President and coordinates with departments and agencies on matters of intellectual property policy and strategy. Seems like a pretty big job.
Yes.
Pretty important job.
Yes.
So let me confess, I'm going to ask you a question, and I don't expect you to answer it. But you may try and maybe do much better than I expect. And it's on something called artificial intelligence, AI. The presiding Democrat in the Senate is Senator Schumer. and Senator Schumer has taken an intense personal interest in artificial intelligence, to the point where he's had several high-level briefings that he's invited his colleagues in the Senate on a bipartisan basis to attend. I have done my best to try to understand this issue through the eyes of a liberal arts lawyer, which doesn't take me very far. But it seems that AI, artificial intelligence, would have some real relevance to the future of the area of interest that you're seeking. Would you like to make a comment on that?
Sure, Senator. First, I think that AI is both a promise and a concern. And a concern in that AI could lead people to more infringements and to more counterfeit goods. But I think that I need to get more information before making sort of like a broad comment on AI, because intellectual property is decided on a case-by-case basis. And I wouldn't want to use a broad brush to talk about an emerging technology that is developing still. But what I will say is that I know that there's a lot of research being done right now, and if I'm confirmed, I will make sure that I learn about all the research being done on AI, that I stay abreast of conversations, and I actually applaud this committee for starting that conversation about AI. And I would absolutely stay abreast of conversations, and in that context, the question that I would have when looking at the research and at those conversations is, how will AI affect American jobs? How will it protect the health and safety of the American people? And how will we use AI or combat things that result from AI to protect innovation, to protect creativity, and to make sure that all Americans are safe?
That's all I could ask, and as I said, I didn't expect the answer to completely exhaust the subject, because it is almost unlimited in the applications. I was just paging through here as well, Judge Bryan, because it said at one point that you have handled 8,000 cases. Is that true?
As a district court judge in St. Paul, I was assigned to various types of cases, and adding them all up is more than 8,000 that I was assigned case numbers.
Some experience. And what about trials?
Well, as a practitioner working for the United States Department of Justice, I had trials in federal court as a federal prosecutor. As a judge, I estimate between 100 and 120 trials that I presided over. That doesn't include some of the petty misdemeanor trials that are trials that would number in the hundreds.
Quite a lot of experience. Judge Lee, I can recall appearing as a small-town attorney before a federal judge, and knowledge of the law was important, knowledge of the facts was critical, but the temperament of the judge had more to do with the outcome than almost all the work we did in preparation. Can you speak about the temperament of a federal judge who, if they're successful, ends up with a lifetime appointment?
Thank you for that question, Senator Durbin. I would have to go back to the judge who I clerked for on the district court, Jerome Turner. He was somebody who, no matter what his views were, no matter what he had for coffee what he had for breakfast that morning, his temperament on the bench was even-handed, fair. He always treated every litigant as they were the most important ones in the room. He always made sure that he was well prepared, and he treated each case as though it was the most important. And I think bringing all those qualities, that is what our litigants deserve in our courtrooms every day. That is what I try to do. And he did it all with this incredible depth and humility.
Thank you. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Lee, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay. A few years ago, you published an article in the Hastings Race and Poverty Law Journal. In that publication, you criticized the prison system based on the fact that the prison system, quote, relies heavily on a dichotomous sex-based means of classification, meaning, quote, prisoners are classified by their biological attributes rather than their gender identification. Do I take this to mean that you think that in some circumstances, biologically male prisoners should be placed in prison facilities set aside to incarcerate women based on their identification?
Senator, that article or that piece was a summary of a panel which I moderated
Sure.
over, maybe it was 13, 14
Uh-huh.
years ago. We had 3 panelists which focused on 3 different populations or segments of the prison population. The piece's purpose was to summarize the arguments and discussions that were raised by each of those panelists.
Right.
And so
That's why I'm
what
asking the
that
question
is.
about what you think. Do you think biological male prisoners should be placed in in prisons set aside for women?
Senator, that issue in terms of designations and so forth are live issues which are happening across the country in our courts. Well, important conversations with policymakers are having and which we are deciding and reviewing as courts. And so I don't want to make it appear as though I'm prejudging the case.
Okay, but you did comment on that, and that's what raised the question. And the reason I'm concerned with it is there are a number of women who have been concerned about this, including
Yes.
a number who are the survivors of domestic violence, who are currently suing Governor Gavin Newsom in the state of California to stop a California law that would do this. It would house prisoners based on their declared gender identity, thus allowing in many circumstances for a biologically male prisoner to identify as female and on that basis be placed inside a prison facility set aside for women. They've raised concerns there. So what would you say to those women? And what would you say to those who, as allegations are now being made, that say that they've been assaulted while in prison by a fellow inmate, raped by biologically male prisoners who were placed in a female prison?
Senator, I would say to them that every woman has a right to feel safe and be free of sexual violence. I would also say...
Including in
that,
prison?
Yes.
Okay.
And I would say... Sorry, Senator, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, no, that's okay. I just... It appeared to be a critique. If you're telling me it was not a critique, when on pages 227 and 228 of the aforementioned Hastings Race and Poverty Law Journal article, when you appear to be criticizing the prison system for the fact that it, quote, relies heavily on a dichotomous sex-based means of classification. Was that not a criticism by you?
As I said, it was a panel which I moderated, and with that piece was a summary of each of the panelists, their views, the issues that they were raising across the board with those 3 populations.
Okay. In a speech you gave in 2016, you stated that, quote, Korean-American lawyers continue to fight against bamboo ceiling. You're not alone in this, and I took it from that, bamboo ceiling referring to limitations imposed on the basis of race. You're not alone in that, and what you described seems similar to some of the discrimination that was experienced by the Asian American plaintiffs in the Students for Fair Admissions case, in which the Supreme Court found that the law had been violated, the law and the Constitution had been offended by some of these programs. And yet the Asian Law Caucus, of which you're a board member, fought to maintain Michigan's affirmative action policies, policies that were found unlawful in that case. Do you want to explain these 2 positions that seem to be different? On the one hand, you're describing the bamboo ceiling effect. On the other hand, you're on the board of an organization that sought to perpetuate the very policies that were found to be discriminatory against Asians.
Thank you for that question, Senator. I was on the board of the Asian Law Caucus, I believe, over a decade ago or so.
Mm-hmm. So you're not on the board at the time that case was decided, in other words.
Okay. And in terms of the case, the Students for Fair Admissions, that is the law of the land. What that says is what I will be applying fully, faithfully, and without reservation.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, can I ask one quick follow-up on this, and I'll be brief, relevant to that. In the Students for Fair Admissions case, the court concluded with the statement, Eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it, for the guarantee of equal protection cannot mean one thing when applied to a person of another color. If both are not accorded the same protection, then it is not equal, close quote. Do you agree with that statement?
I agree as what is emblazoned on the wall of the Supreme Court that there should be equal justice for all.
Thank you.
Senator Klobuchar?
Thank you very much. I'm going to focus on our Minnesota nominee, but thank you to the other nominees as well. Judge Bryan, prior to your decade of service on the bench, you served as an assistant U.S. attorney in Minnesota, where you prosecuted over 350 defendants. Law enforcement officers that you worked with said you will make, in their words, an outstanding federal judge. As case agents, they wrote that we knew that he treated every case as his highest priority. We believe that he will do the same for each of the matters assigned to him as a federal judge. What motivated you to become a federal prosecutor? What cases are you most proud of? And then what lessons did you take from that time that will help you as a judge, or help you as a judge?
So I think you look to the example of both of my parents, my father was a clinical psychologist after leaving the Army and dedicated his professional life to helping people. My mother was a public school teacher throughout her life, 35 years plus of being a public school teacher. And they instilled that appreciation for public service in me, and I think that's one of the reasons I was driven to pursue that career. As a prosecutor, I respected the case agents that I worked with very much, and the sacrifices that they made, the risks that they had to take to do their job, and I felt it was only fitting that the U.S. attorneys who were working with them, the assistant U.S. attorneys working with them, would also bring the same sense of dedication that they showed. I think there are a lot of lessons that I can take from my time as a prosecutor that will help me as a judge if confirmed. I take those lessons with me to the bench every day, the lessons I learned from the judges in front of whom I practiced, and I hope to be able to emulate all of their great examples when I take the bench.
Thank you. If you are confirmed, you'll be the first Latino on the federal bench in Minnesota. You've been active in Minnesota Hispanic Bar Association, specifically working with young attorneys. Why do you believe that mentoring young attorneys is so important?
Well, because I've experienced the benefits of being mentored myself. I know that as a young attorney, there's a lot of questions that you come to the office with, and it does really help to have someone supportive who can take you under their wing. There's a letter from one of those persons, Erica McDonald, who was someone who I was mentored by as a young AUSA, and was honored to have her support as part of this process. But that's why, because I know personally how meaningful it was for me.
Yeah, I'll note that Erica McDonald was a line prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office, went on to be a state court judge, I believe, and then was the U.S. attorney appointed by the previous administration. So, Judge Bryan, you presided over 8,500 cases as a trial and appellate judge. You've been reversed only 6 times, 4 times on the district court and twice on the Court of Appeals. I'm sure you remember each of them. But nevertheless, your rulings have been upheld 99% of the time. Could you talk about your judicial decision-making and what led you to have that kind of a record?
Well, I, as a judge, have tried to faithfully and objectively apply binding precedent to the issues in front of me, try to understand and frame the issues in a concrete way, but one that allows for application of binding precedent. The few times where I have been reviewed, I welcome it. It's an important, a crucial part of what makes our system of justice consistent and fair. So I'm great. I learn from it every time, and I welcome it whenever it occurs.
Thank you very much. I don't have any other questions.
Thanks, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Kennedy.
Judge Lee, I don't believe you were truthful in answering Senator Lee's questions. You wrote an article in 2010 entitled An Overview of Special Populations in California Prisons, did you not?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And in that article, you argued that male prisoners should be allowed to claim they are transgender in order to be assigned to a female prison, didn't you?
As I said to Senator Lee, that was an article which arose from a symposium, which I just moderated the panel, and then summarized for the symposium edition the different arguments and issues that were raised.
Well, I've read your article, and I don't think that's accurate. You identify certain special populations, transgender people, immigrants, and racial minorities. And you're very critical of the way the California prison system treats them. For example, I'm going to quote here, your words, not mine. The prison system relies heavily on a dichotomous sex-based means of classification. Prisoners are classified by their biological attributes rather than their gender identification. As described by one of the people in the California prison system, the classification process is gender neutral. We really don't distinguish between transgender and non-transgender inmates. Did I read that correctly?
Senator, I don't recall it word by word, but
There
I
it
think
is.
so. Okay.
And at the end, here's your conclusion. Your words, not mine. In conclusion, because each of these populations, including transgender, traditionally has been marginalized by American society based on their gender, race, ethnicity, or status, they are often further distanced from and marginalized by society upon incarceration. A recent president said you can fairly judge the character of a society by how it treats the weak, the vulnerable, the most easily forgotten. Did you say that?
That's what was written.
Okay. And so, but you're saying your article is just a summary of the opinions of people that you moderated?
I moderated a panel. There were 3 panelists about those different topics. That's what was represented in terms of the issues. And
Well, let me just ask you,
raised.
do you
But
think that a male prisoner convicted in a court of law on a final judgment should be allowed to claim that he is transgender in order to be assigned to a female prison?
Senator, as discussed earlier, the issue of assignment in facilities and such is one which is being actively litigated in California and may become before me. If I were to be
now all of a
confirmed, I would
sudden
do-
you can't answer it. You answered it in your law review article. You
Senator,
were for it. But now you can't answer it? Is that your testimony?
my testimony is that was an article from over 13 years ago, and that as a judge now, and as I have been for nearly the last 5 years, my responsibilities are to fully, faithfully, and
The truth is, you believe that a male prisoner should be able to allow at the sentencing phase to claim that he is transgender in order to be assigned to a female prison. Now, you believe that, don't you?
Senator,
You wrote it.
again, that was a piece which summarized and came out of a symposium edition about the California prison crisis generally.
You found it at Georgetown, the Georgetown Journal of Gender and Sexuality Law Journal, did you not?
At Georgetown, I was one of the founding members. I didn't, of the.
Did you found it? Did you help found it?
I was one of the initial founding group members.
All right, and one of the first articles was entitled, that you picked was entitled, quote, "The Politics of Eradication and Future of LGBT Rights." And in that article, you accused Republicans, or the article you chose, accused Republicans of being influenced by, quote, a desire to eradicate LGBT identities. Is that accurate?
Senator, I was an articles editor in the first edition.
You don't remember
was
that
never-
article?
I do not recall. I do not know whether or not I edited that.
Okay, well, here's
article.
another article you picked. Quote, here's the title of the article that you picked for your journal. Gender is fake. The ongoing need for an equal rights amendment. And the article says, quote, the need for the ERA is more pressing now than ever, given modern conceptions of gender as a social construct. Did I read that right?
Senator, I don't, as I said, I was an articles editor who
Look,
edited.
Senator
articles
Durbin may
edited.
save you here, but I don't think you've been honest with this committee, because I've read your writings, and I'd respect you a lot more if you stepped up to the plate and said, "This is what I believe."
I might say to the Senator from Louisiana, my goal is to run the committee and not salvation. I believe the judge can speak for herself.
I'm sure what. Well,
Judge Padilla.
let me say this. Thank you for giving me the extra time.
Judge Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Padilla.
I've been called worse. I do have a question asked the first panel that I intend to ask the second panel, but given the issues and, if I can use air quotes, concerns raised by some of my colleagues, let me try to address the topic at hand. As some of my Republican colleagues have mentioned before joining the bench, the Superior Court bench, Judge Lee published a piece on the treatment of special populations in California prisons, a dynamic I'm familiar with, having served in the state legislature. This academic paper presented a factual review of the difficulties that, yes, certain marginalized populations, including women, immigrants, and transgender individuals, face while they're in custody. There is plenty of documented evidence of this. Now, the paper in question, as I reviewed, did not actually take any stance on any of these efforts or advocate for any specific position. Judge Lee, is that correct?
Senator, that is correct.
So there was no stance. With that clarification, is it fair to clarify for the record then that the piece was not an opinion piece?
That is correct, Senator. At the time, I was in academia. I was moderating a panel. The people who were speaking at the panel were the experts. Those are not areas which I was an expert of in academia or otherwise. It was summarizing the issues that were presented, the issues which were active, as you mentioned, at that time in California.
Okay. And to reiterate the fundamental question or concern for members of the committee, should you be fortunate enough to be confirmed, how would you make critical decisions respecting precedent, case law, et cetera? How would you or would you not separate personal beliefs, opinions from how you would rule?
Senator, it's something which I do every day. I've done so for nearly the last 5 years. It is an oath I take seriously to uphold. When I put on that robe, I set aside any other outside opinions or politics or things which people discuss, because I'm focused on that case which is before me. That's why I owe the litigants, and I fully, fairly, and impartially follow the law to the facts that are before me.
Thank you very much. Now to my question. Y'all were in the audience when I asked this of the nominees on the first panel, and it comes back to the importance of diversity. Number one, would you agree that diversity is an asset to our nation, including the judiciary? And if you disagree, I would like to hear it. If you do agree, what would you do if you're fortunate enough to be confirmed to ensure diversity in your courtrooms with specific attention to law clerks, because we know how important a quality clerkship experience can be for young lawyers who may seek to someday serve on the federal bench or serve as lawyers in the public or the private sector. We'll start with Judge Bryan.
Thank you, Senator. I think a judicial branch that includes judges from a variety of different backgrounds is one important way that the judiciary can build and maintain public trust and confidence. I do try and hire law clerks that are a good fit for my chambers because you work so closely together. And as you noted, it can be something that really does impact somebody's career. And I'm grateful for my own experience as a law clerk and try to keep that in mind when I approach the hiring decisions.
Thank you. Judge Lee.
I similarly value having that diversity, and it's something which I encouraged in my law students when I was at Hastings to do so, was on the clerkship panel, faculty committee, met with students, mentored students, similarly have done so since I was a judge, and if I were fortunate enough to be confirmed, I would try to reach diversity in every level, geographic, school, and otherwise, in terms of my chambers.
Ms. Robinson.
So I do believe diversity is important. I'm not going to speak about courts and courtrooms. I'm not obviously here for that. I think that it's important as well to recognize diverse creators, authors, and all those across the IP landscape. And if I am confirmed and become the IPAC, I will continue to keep diversity in all of the decisions that I make. It's part of the strategic plan. And remember those creators that have diverse interest in IP.
Yep. And I appreciate the distinct role that you're nominated for, not just this committee, but subcommittees of the Judiciary Committee have had discussion. Exhibit A right now is AI, right? And the both promise and concerns about quickly evolving technology and the need for diversity in inputs if we're going to ensure proper outputs of technology. This is one example of diversity in the IP and technology space more broadly. So thank you for that distinction. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. Senator Haruno.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to each of you on your nominations. I ask the following two questions of all nominees for any of the committees on which I sit. So I will ask each of you, and we'll start with Judge Bryan in responding. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No.
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 Judge Bryan, I must say that presiding over 8,000 cases and 100 or 120 trials, that is impressive, and to be reversed only 9 times. Now, I note that you testified that you apply precedent faithfully and objectively in deciding your cases. I think you said that.
Yes.
That's commendable. And Ms. Lee, you have been questioned by some of my colleagues about things you have written, and ostensibly maybe those things reflect your views on certain things. But would you agree with Judge Bryan that the way you've been a judge for 5 years now? Is that correct?
That's right.
And that you too apply the law faithfully and objectively in
yes,
deciding?
Yes, Senator. It's one of the things I take very seriously, and similarly in terms of the reversal rate, which I've had, which is only less than 3, I've tried to do and reflect it, I think, as well. Reflects in my record as well.
Regarding your writing that talked about how transgender persons, immigrants, and racial minorities are treated in prison, I can agree with you that, and with Judge Bryan, that these are, I would say, marginalized groups, and basically you and I in particular, you and I are part of the marginalized groups. We know how people can be treated in a way that is highly discriminatory. So I can only envision that in a prison setting, that becomes even more. It can become even more pronounced in terms of discrimination. So you have an understanding of those kinds of environments. Thank you very much for that. Now, both you and Judge Bryan have talked about how important mentoring is. Can you just describe a little bit more about someone whose mentoring meant so much to you, Judge Lee?
There have been multiple people. I've been very fortunate, both in terms of the district court judge who I had mentioned, Jerome Turner, and as I'd mentioned earlier, we were very different people coming from different backgrounds, but he embedded me a fundamental respect and was very rigorous about it in terms of the rule of law and the value of precedence. We might disagree about a lot of things, but we always agreed about the law. And in terms of doing that, I've held that rigor in terms of my analysis as a judge now, making sure that I'm following binding precedent otherwise, and applying it. And then for the Ninth Circuit, I would say Judge Turner always told me to go back to the community, and I've tried to do so. I mean, Judge Ferguson has always told me to go back, and I've tried to do so.
One of the things that you wrote about is the barriers facing formerly incarcerated people upon reentry, and how important it is to provide them avenues where they can reenter the community. And recently, the only federal halfway house in my state of Hawaii was closed, and this reentry facility was vital to our community, and I have been fighting to reopen this facility in order to provide these important services. Could you tell us briefly more about the importance of having a reentry program for decreasing recidivism and reintegrating formerly incarcerated people who, by the way, most incarcerated people do get back into the community? Why are these reentry programs so important?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I think, as you mentioned, at the time when that piece was written and discussing, it was a relatively new issue and one which I was not as familiar with. Later on, when I was at Hastings, making sure that people knew service to be provided, making sure that they knew the remedies which they would have is something I focused on later on while I was at UC Hastings. And across the board, it's important that for public safety that we go back and make sure that people can be reintegrated within society. And so I had done some of that work when I was at UC Hastings.
I would say that every federal prison program should have a reentry kind of program. Mr. Chairman, may I just make one comment regarding Ms. Robinson? She has not been getting very many questions, but you went into how important diversity is in the IP area, and completely agree with you, because we know that women and minorities are not very much represented in terms of people who get patents and all of that. So I would expect that you will do everything you can to have women and minorities be very much a part of a system that really means innovation and leadership in our country.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. I want to apologize to the nominees and their families and friends that I have to step out. There's a roll call vote on the floor, and my two colleagues are going to take over in the committee. Both voted, I hope. So I have to run to the floor. I'd like to say two things quickly. I've sat here through hundreds and hundreds of nominees, and you catch the drift of questioning. And two things that we witnessed today are very common. One is to find the nicest thing you ever said or did about the worst client you ever had, and to be reminded of that and try to defend it. That is common, and people can draw from that, which they will. And the second is trying to draw each one of the nominees into their personal feelings. Imagine this hypothetical, and only a hypothetical. What if I said at one of these hearings, I do not believe in same-gender marriage? I just don't believe in it at all. How would that affect me as judge on the first case I have involving that issue? People would say right away, I want a new judge. I want to change a venue. I want to get to somebody who's at least objective on the issue. So the nominees are instructed and properly don't answer that question about your personal feelings. They're supposed to apply the law as established to the facts that are brought before them. And so they face withering criticism for not being forthright in their personal feelings, but professionally they're doing the right thing. I thank the nominees, and I turn the floor over to Senator Coons.
I defer to Senator Welch.
Thank you, Senator Coons. First of all, thank you, Judge Lee, and thank you, Judge Bryan. I really appreciate it. And I do have some questions for you, Ms. Robinson. You have what I think is an incredibly important role, subject to your confirmation. You know, the patent process, as we know, has a very valid purpose, and that's to protect the intellectual property rights of creators. And it gives them an awesome power of pricing power during that period. I'm talking about drugs right now. During that period of exclusivity, basically, the creator of the drug can fix their price, and it's a take it or leave it situation. But I'm also concerned, and I respect that. What I disrespect and has to be dealt with is the patent abuse. Tactics like evergreening, which you're, I'm sure, familiar with, or tactics like the patent thickets that are created. All of these are intended to, as you know, extend that monopoly pricing power beyond the stated period of market exclusivity. My view is that this has been an incredible problem for taxpayers, for consumers, for employers who provide health care to their hardworking employees, because it keeps prices up because of that abuse of the patent system. And my question to you in your role is thoughts about how, A, is that a problem, and B, how to deal with it.
Senator, as you know, the IPAC does not create laws or create policy. But I just want to acknowledge also that there's great discussions happening around the issues that you're bringing up. I'm not privy to some of those discussions that are happening right now because I'm not currently in the administration and have all the information on those things. But reiterating that the IPAC doesn't create policy or law, the IPAC is concerned about counterfeit drugs entering into our country and affecting the lives of Americans. And so if I am confirmed, I will make sure that I work with all the relevant agencies to support the work that they're currently doing, but also to look at nuances and new technology and new ways of infringing and bringing those counterfeit drugs into our homes.
Thank you, and that's very important to do. But in addition to that, there is the patent system that I think in order for it to maintain credibility and its purpose, there has to be a focus on where there's abuse of it. And is there anything in your role, is there anything that would be part of your role in this position that would be monitoring or reviewing or paying attention to situations where there's an abuse of the patent system?
So once again, the IPAC's role is not to create law or policy. It is to create a strategic plan for intellectual property for the United States and to coordinate the relevant agencies. And you mentioned jobs. You mentioned security. The IPAC does care about that. And I think that having a rigorous, robust, and strategic plan to enforce against counterfeit drugs is a way to protect those jobs, protect our economy, and our security in our homes and businesses.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just ask you, Judge Bryan, is there anything you want to add to what you have spoken to? I had to step out to vote as well, but I don't know if anyone in my absence has asked you questions you'd like to elaborate your answer on. I want to give you an opportunity to do that, and Judge Lee, for you to do that as well.
Thank you, Senator. I do not have anything to add to my previous remarks.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator. I do not have anything to add to my previous remarks either.
Well, I want to thank all three of you for the service you've been providing throughout your careers. It's pretty impressive. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Welch. And thank you, Judge Lee, Judge Bryan. Thank you to you and your families
for your willingness to continue to serve our nation. I also now have to run and vote. Wanted to make sure the chairman got to get there and vote, but I briefly am going to engage with President Biden's nominee to serve as the Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinator. Deborah Robinson is uniquely qualified to serve in this role, and I'm grateful that you're willing to step forward and contribute to this. This is a position I had a hand in helping strengthen and fund, and I have been anxious, eager for there to be a confirmed person leading our intellectual property enforcement. And I'm going to submit for the record a wonderful letter of strong endorsement of your qualifications that has dozens of organizations listed on it, but I will briefly reference the Copyright Alliance, the Motion Picture Association, the Screen Actors Guild, SAG-AFTRA, and Universal Music Group. So even at a time when they are sharply divided on some other issues, they were able to agree that you would be a great nominee for this position. One of the areas I'm particularly concerned about is making sure that we are striking the right balance. We are next Wednesday going to have a broad conversation with IP leaders and innovators from across a wide range of fields that will include a SAG-AFTRA representative and the head of the Motion Picture Association. I'm about to release a proposal that would protect individuals against unauthorized AI reproductions of their voice, name, image, likeness. And I would love to ask you about how Congress should balance these rights, but I know you are not yet in a position to, and that the IPEC does not make policy. You are well trained in that answer, well briefed and well prepared for this hearing. How would you in this role ensure that the agencies of the federal government who have a relevant IP role all have a seat at the table and contribute to shaping our policy, particularly in such a contentious and fast-moving area as the intersection of AI and copyright?
First, thank you for your nice comments. I appreciate that, Senator. And one of the roles of the IPEC is to coordinate. And so if I'm so confirmed and I become the IPEC, the first priority I would have is to go to each of the relevant agencies and the stakeholders and to ask about what their challenges are, ask about what they're seeing, what their data is, get all the information that I could so that I wouldn't be coordinating in sort of a whole, so that I have all the information that is available to me, and also lean on the relevant departments like Office of Science and Technology Policy, and then come up with a strategic plan that coordinates all the efforts of these individual agencies and so that they complement each other in what they're doing.
That's music to my ears. I look forward to seeing you move swiftly in that direction. I came here from a global manufacturing company where, as in-house counsel, I had to deal with a trade secret theft episode where there was no right of private action to seek redress. And literally the individual raced out of our plant with it was almost like a movie, like with a laptop full of secrets, and ran to the airport and got on a plane to China. Senator Orrin Hatch and I worked tirelessly and ultimately got the Defend Trade Secrets Act signed into law a number of years later. It is important to me that at a time when there seems to be bipartisan agreement that protecting American invention and innovation should be a high priority, that we do our best at that. Online piracy is a particular concern to me as well, and it's estimated to cost $30 billion in lost revenue and nearly 250,000 jobs a year. The UK, Australia, and the EU use no-fault injunctions to combat digital piracy. If I were somehow magically successful in getting that remedy available here in the United States, as I think it should be, would no-fault injunctions help empower the IPEC and help empower our intellectual property protection efforts?
Consistent with what I've been saying before is that the IPEC doesn't create law or policy, but what I do care about is protecting American innovation and creativity. And so if no-fault injunctions were available, I would use that like I would use every other resource that would come to me, either from agencies, stakeholders, or the like, to come up with a plan and facilitate that plan to enforce against any infringements out there.
One of the other things you talked about with Senator Welch was the importance of protecting our nation and our people from counterfeit pharmaceuticals. We have one of the safest drug supplies in the world, but I have lived and worked in places in the developing world where as much as 30% of the pharmaceuticals available for sale are in fact counterfeit, which is both dangerous and heartbreaking in countries where access to modern medicine is a challenge. What do you view as the biggest challenge in curtailing counterfeit goods, and how would you focus your efforts on addressing that problem?
One of the biggest challenges is China right now. And how I would focus with China or otherwise, and with any other infringement coming from any other country, is to work with the foreign-facing agencies and support what they're doing currently, but also work with the foreign-facing agencies as they use the programs that they have with international partners to prevent counterfeits, hopefully, from coming into the country in the first place.
One of the big challenges I would argue we face is that now in the digital marketplace, there's really no incentive for online platforms to be as thorough and vigorous as they could be at ensuring that there's no transactions or sales on their platforms of counterfeit goods. Senator Tillis and I are soon going to reintroduce our ShopSafe Act that would provide very targeted incentives to the online platforms to make sure that third-party sellers of goods are respecting IP rights. Thank you. Thank you, Judge Lee. Thank you, Judge Bryan. Thank you, Ms. Robinson, for your willingness to serve. I look forward to a positive vote on all of you getting out of this committee and to the Senate floor, and God willing, being confirmed at some point later this year. And I appreciate your patience, and I too now must go vote. Before I adjourn, a quick logistical note. Questions for the record for members of this committee are due to the nominees by 5 p.m. on Wednesday, September 13th, and the record will remain open until that time to submit records such as letters or similar materials. Thank you very much. With that, this hearing is adjourned.